Hey everyone, and welcome to Archaea Viking, and happy belated Black History Month. Uh, Usually, every year for Black History Month, I like to try to do a couple of videos in honor of Black History Month. However, unfortunately, this year I got a little busier than usual, so I'm only doing one video this year, and admittedly doing it a couple of days after Black History Month technically ends. Now, that being said, as with my previous one of my previous series on in Native American History Month, I think it is important to note that Black history is all the time, not just in the month of February. So I'm still going to do one in honor of Black History Month anyway, and also this is going to go into my playlist for Black History Month, so it will be there always anyway. Furthermore, this is going to be a video in a new series that I've been planning on starting for a while on the European scramble for Africa, or the time period when European empires uh, began to carve up Africa amongst them, the continent of Africa up amongst themselves. And also, the video I'm choosing to do today is one of great impact and importance on Black history, especially the history of the African continent itself. And it is also, admittedly, one of the darker aspects of uh, the history of the African continent. A dark aspect among a history of dark aspects um, of the African continent. And I want to make this clear. I'm talking specifically about the effects of European colonialism on the continent of Africa, not all African history or the history of all African cultures on the continent, obviously. Uh, I mean, you would think I wouldn't have to state that, but unfortunately, certain events over the past few years make that a necessity. So, with all that in mind, you might be asking, well, what is this video about? Well, this video is about the Congo Free State of Africa and its ruler, Leopold II of Belgium. So, right off the bat, when we hear the phrase the Congo or anything equivalent of that, we tend to think of either in our modern minds, either the Congo Basin, a large area of rainforest, uh, in various other environments, including mountain and lacustrine or lake environments and river environments, in Central Africa and Central West Africa along the Atlantic coast, or we tend to think of the Democratic Republic of Congo and its neighbor, the Republic of Congo, which you can also see here on this map as well. And of course, these are not incorrect ways views to have. After all, for those of us who've been, most of us who've been alive, the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo have been all we've known, the only way we've known the Congo, except of course for the rainforest. Now, of course, there are still people who are alive prior to the 1960s when these nations were created who do remember them um, as something else, and we'll get to that later in the in the video. But my point is, it's still understandable that that's what we think of when we hear the phrase the Congo. We either think of the Congo Basin, which is completely correct because that's where the name the Congo comes from, um, or is in reference to, or we tend to think of the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, that all being said, in terms of the Republic of Congo and Democratic Republic of Congo, while these nations have had their borders for 60 years or so, going on 70 years, I think, at this point, uh, these countries have not always had these borders. This region has seen its borders shift and morph and change due to a combination of different catalysts, events, and the actions of multiple different individuals. So, in order to understand how the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo and the Congo, its basin itself, got its borders that we know today and became the way we know them today, we need to go back a little bit further in time to get a better look at the larger picture. Starting with the pre-colonial history of the Congo Basin, which itself starts, well, admittedly, it starts way further than that. It starts uh, all the way back to the origins of humanity itself. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to start with the Bantu expansions and the origins of the early Iron Age cultures in the Congo Basin. So, the Bantu expansion refers to the expansion of the Bantu language group and the Bantu speaking peoples into Central and South Africa, which you can see the various highly diverse Bantu speaking groups here, and a few of them here as well. And these groups began to spread out and migrate and settle in um, Central and Southern Africa. Um, well, this is a little bit debated. As you can see on this map here, some scholars and archaeologists and such put the date of the beginning of the Bantu expansions into Central and Southern Africa around 2000 BCE, though I have also seen some put it further up at like 1000 BCE and even beginning in like the first 1 to 100 CE. So keep that in mind that the beginning date is a little fluid, but regardless, sometime between 2000 BCE and 100 CE, the Bantu speaking peoples began to migrate into Central and Southern Africa, with the final migrations ending sometime around the 1500s. And again, some push it a little further to say some even into the 1600s CE. And it is also important to note this was not one big migration, it was multiple migrations, with some, say, migrating first into Central Africa and then staying, and then another group breaks off and migrates into East Africa and stays, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, repeat process. And with the expansion of these Bantu speaking peoples came the introduction of agriculture, specifically the harvesting of crops such as sorghum, millet, and cassava and such, and yams also. And also, it led to the spread of Iron Age cultures, which you can see in this map, which I do want to state, as you can see here, this map that I'm about to show, all the colors indicate CE dates or AD dates, with the exception for a singular 250 BCE date on the map. But with the spread of the Bantu speaking cultures came the introduction of iron tools and weapons, which you can see here on this map here. We also have evidence for this in rock art depicting Bantu warriors with iron weapons seen here, and also archaeological evidence that and excavations that have yielded iron tools connected to the various Bantu speaking peoples and cultures. Now this brings us to the Congo Basin itself, where with the sort of settlement of the Bantu-speaking peoples in the Congo Basin, we begin to see societies develop, such as the societies in the Congo Basin's Up Imba Depression, with these societies developing between the 600s and 1700s CE, which you can see here on this map here and here. And this is talked about in great length by archaeologists, including Nonhalana Lamini in their thesis, sorry, their doctoral thesis titled "The Early Inhabitants of the Upimba Depression, the Democratic Republic of Congo." Biological Review of Cultural Continuity Theory, where they look at various sites seen on this map within the Upimba Depression. and are able to determine sort of the chronological sequence of these societies, with them starting in the 600s and 700s CE or AD with the Camelambian culture, going all the way up to the Luba kingdom, which we'll talk about in a minute, that reigned in the region between the 1700s and really the mid to late 1800s, but some dates put it into the 1900s CE. And here's some examples of the sort of cultural markers and artwork of these various cultures within the Upimba Depression, such as the Kasalian culture, which is recognizable as a culture from 700 to 1200 CE. The Catonian, or either the Catonian or the Catosian culture. I'm unsure how it's exactly pronounced, so I do apologize. But the Catosian or Catonian culture, which existed between 1000 to 1200 CE. Um, then with all that in mind, it's important to note that the cultures of the Pemba Depression did not live in a vacuum. They actually were connected with the broader cultures of Africa and participated in a large trade network where they exported salt and iron. In exchange for those, they would import glass beads and cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean, which you can see here and here. Now, I do want to point out that these are not glass beads from the Pemba Depression. These are actually from Zimbabwe, connected to the Mapung Ubwe culture and the Kingdom of Mutamba and various other cultures. However, these are generally what the glass beads that the various cultures of the Pemba Depression. This is generally what the glass beads would have looked like that they were importing. And then in the between the 1390 and the 1910 CE, we begin to see the rise of great kingdoms within the Congo Basin, with the most famous being the Kingdom of Congo, which is where the Congo Basin and the Republic of Congo and Republic of Congo get their names from, where the Kingdom of Congo rose in 1390 CE and had a few different end dates and dates in which they sort of reunified. With them dissolving in 1709 CE first, and then reunifying in the same year, and then they sort of became a vassal state, tributary state of the Portuguese Empire in 1857 CE, which we'll talk about a little later in the video. And then they officially dissolved as an existing kingdom, even a vassal kingdom, in 1914 CE. And then we had the Luba Kingdom, which its origin date is debated. Some say it's in the 1200s, some say it's in the 1300s, and it would last until the 1880s CE. And this is it at its greatest extent, compared to the previous map, which was its beginning borders. And then we also had the Lunda Kingdom and the Kuba Kingdom, both of which rose in the 1600s and lasted until the 1880s CE. And then the Kazembe Kingdom, which rose in the 1700s and lasted until the 1890s CE. So now we need to look at the culture of the kingdoms of the Congo Basin. So, for one thing, they were matrilineal, meaning their kinship was traced through the female line, and a person identified with their mother's lineage, and property was passed down from the mother's family, and children were born into the clan of their mother and would take their social status from it. Each kingdom was ruled by kings who traced their lineage from deities and legendary figures. Nobles and village leaders, with titles varying depending on the kingdom and culture, would oversee the day-to-day lives of the inhabitants of a kingdom. Each kingdom had a professional army consisting primarily of levy archers, small contingents of infantry who would fight with swords and shields, and a small contingent of heavily armored nobles. A variety of environments in the region were settled, including the coast, forest, and savanna. hunting, forager, and agricultural food strategies were utilized altogether. A variety of crops were cultivated in the Congo Basin, including cassava and millet, and some communities would herd domesticated cattle. And all kingdoms of the Congo Basin were involved in complex trade networks with ivory and prisoners of war to be sold into enslavement, becoming key trade goods. And here are all the sources that I got this information from. And here is an example of cassava and millet that would have been grown for food within these kingdoms. And here is a pretty typical type of cow or cattle breed that was and still is domesticated in much of Central and South Africa. And here are some examples of some of the warriors and soldiers and archers that would have been used by those kingdoms. I do apologize. It's grainy, I know, but it's the only picture I could really find of the warriors, types of warriors that these kingdoms had. So I do apologize. And their weapons, of course, varied with swords, with soldiers using swords of varying shapes and sizes. The primary weapon was, of course, the bow and arrow. They used spears of various designs, shields of various designs, and after contact with Europeans, they would adopt the crossbow and firearms such as the Portuguese trade musket and eventually the so-called African trade muskets, which existed and were used well into, as you can see in this picture here, 1900 CE. And the reason for this is, while yes, more modern firearms existed and they could and did trade for those, such as percussion cap firearms, percussion caps are much harder to maintain within the humid environments of the Congo Basin. So oftentimes, flintlock muskets were preferred because flint is, or chert, however you want to call it, stone is more readily available and easier to maintain than percussion caps and the powder that the percussion caps require. That being said, percussion cap weapons and modern breech loading weapons, such as the Snyder Enfield breech loading rifle, were used, as well as repeating rifles, such as the Winchester rifle, and the fairly modern uh, um, rifles, such as the Fusil Gras rifle, which was used uh, in the Boxer Rebellion as well as the Franco-Prussian War. And then here is an example of some art from the Kingdom of Congo, some art from the Luba Kingdom and the Luba people, which you can see here. Some art from the Kuba Kingdom and Kuba people, which you can see here. And as you can see from all of these pieces of artwork are very sophisticated pieces of artwork. And I'll go back through them just so you can really appreciate just how beautiful they are. Because far too often, Africa is, African cultures are viewed as primitive, backward, savage, etc. And of course, they're none of these things. Never have been, never, never will be. They are very sophisticated cultures now and always have been, and you can see this in their art, especially that they put out. And then here are some examples of ivory and prisoners of war, which were, of course, valuable commodities and trade goods uh, to European and Arab traders. Which actually brings us to our next section, the arrival of European empires on the Atlantic coast of Africa between the 1400s and 1800s CE. So the arrival of Europeans on the Atlantic coast of Africa. I should clarify the far south Atlantic coast of Africa. Of course, North Africa was not really unknown. The North African kingdoms were very well known to European powers. It's really the central and southern African kingdoms that sort of during this period of time were first contacted by the Europeans. But these first contacts were really began around between the 1410s and 1450s CE, when Prince Henry the Navigator, the Prince of Portugal, would sponsor exploratory expeditions of the west coast of Africa. And then after he died and his, of course, funding dried up, uh, Portuguese explorers continued to explore, with Portuguese sailor Diogo Sal exploring the southern coast of West Africa and making contact with the Kingdom of Congo. And then after this contact, the Portuguese Empire and the Kingdom of Congo would form an alliance and a trade agreement around 1483 CE. And then in 1641 CE, the Dutch Empire would invade and capture the Portuguese city of Luanda on the coast of what is now modern day Angola. Afterwards, the Dutch Empire and the Kingdom of Congo would form an alliance and trade agreements. And it is important to note that after contact with the Portuguese Empire and the Dutch Empire, the Kingdom of Congo would convert to Catholicism. And also, after contact with both of these empires, the Kingdom of Congo and other powerful West African kingdoms would become involved in the transatlantic slave trade, selling prisoners captured in wars with rival kingdoms into enslavement. And I do want to take a second to sort of interject here, because I can already hear some of the comments going, "Aha, see, uh, all the African chattel slavery apologists saying, aha, see, the United States and European powers shouldn't feel bad for inventing African chattel slavery because the Africans sold themselves." It's like, okay, one. So what? That doesn't erase the horrors of African chattel slavery that were uniquely created by white Europeans. And two, no, they were not selling themselves. They were selling prisoners of war from rival kingdoms. They weren't selling their actual citizens. But again, so what? It doesn't change how brutal the system of African chattel slavery was in European nations, including the United States and British, French, etc. colonies. Now, all this being said, despite their alliance, the Kingdom of Congo and the Portuguese Empire would actually go to war multiple times, though the Kingdom of Congo would win each of these wars, with these wars happening between 1622 and 1649 CE. And here, on the previous page, you see the warriors of the Kingdom of Congo. And here you see Portuguese soldiers and an African warrior who would have fought alongside the Portuguese. Uh, now, despite these victories, eventually the Portuguese Empire would defeat the Kingdom of Congo, specifically defeating them in the Battle of Mbuila on October 29th, 1665 CE, which would result in King Antonio the First of Congo being killed in the battle with most of his retainers. And as he had not named an heir, a succession crisis would lead to a civil war and the fragmentation of the Kingdom of Congo between 1665 and 1709 CE. With the Kingdom of Congo eventually reunifying in 1709 CE, albeit in a much diminished form, which you can see here in this map here, where the Kingdom of Congo is this big here in 1648, and then this small here in the 1700s. And it would remain in this state until 1859 CE. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, Masiri, a powerful Nyamwezi, or also known as Yeek, merchant and trader, would trade copper and ivory to the Portuguese in return for rifles. And with these rifles, he would build an army and found the Yeek kingdom in the southeastern portion of the Congo Basin and would conquer neighboring kingdoms, including the Kazembe kingdom. The Yeek kingdom would then quickly take control of major trade routes connected to both the west coast and east coast of Africa, something no other kingdom in the Congo Basin had done up to until this point. And this would happen in 1856 CE. Then, in 1859 CE, Pedro V would seize the throne of the Kingdom of Congo with the help of the Portuguese Empire, and afterwards he would swear fealty to the Portuguese Empire and make the Kingdom of Congo a vassal to the Portuguese Empire. And here's a map of the Portuguese Empire at this point in time. And of course, still more, while all of this was going on, between 1851 and 1873 CE, David Livingstone, a Scottish doctor, missionary, and explorer, would explore and map much of southern Africa, including the Zambezi River. And then after that, between 1874 and 1876 CE, Henry Morton Stanley, a white American journalist and explorer, would explore and map the Congo River. Then, as while all that was even more still going on, the Luba Kingdom would begin to decline due to the control of the trade routes by the Yeek Kingdom, and eventually Portuguese and Arab slave traders from the east coast of Africa would begin consistent raids of the Luba Kingdom to capture prisoners to be sold into enslavement. And it's because of these factors that would lead to the eventual destruction of the Luba Kingdom sometime in the 1880s CE. Then, while the Luba Kingdom was falling, between the 1870s and 1880s CE, the Chokwe people of what is now modern day Angola, Zambia, and the southwestern corner of the Democratic Republic of Congo would obtain rifles from the Portuguese and Arab slave traders. And with these rifles, the Chokwe, oh, sorry, I said slave traders, not just slave traders, regular traders as well, merchants. So they would obtain rifles from Portuguese and Arab traders, and with these rifles, the Chokwe would invade the Lunda kingdom, destroy it, and create their own kingdom. Which now brings us to our next section, Leopold's quest to control the Congo Basin. So, Leopold II, the King of Belgium, would hear of the riches of the Congo Basin. And then he would seek to enrich himself, particularly because he was chafing from the loss of power as a king due to Belgium's establishment of a constitutional monarchy. And as a result, Leopold II would then form the Brussels Geographic Conference and invite multiple explorers, scientists, geographers, and philanthropists to learn more of the region's riches, with this event happening in September of 1876 CE. Then, between 1879 and 1882 CE, he would seek international recognition of his control of the Congo Basin, and Leopold II would enlist the help of the United States, of United States diplomat Henry Shelton Stanford to accomplish this, and would go on to successfully lobby the United States President Chester A. Arthur for recognition of Belgium's control of the Congo Basin. Then, uh, during and after this, Leopold II would employ Henry Morton Stanley to build roads and a new capital for him in the Congo Basin between 1879 and 1884 CE. Now, of course, he did not have good intentions in any way, but to hide his real intentions of using the Congo Basin to personally enrich himself, Leopold II would then establish the International African Association, where he would portray himself and the association as philanthropists and humanitarians who only wished to civilize the Congo Basin and provide humanitarian aid to its inhabitants. And he would do this between 1879 and 1885 CE. Then, between 1884 and 1885 CE, Otto von Bismarck of Germany would convene the 14-nation Berlin Conference, where the member nations would establish trade laws, regulations on colonization of Africa, and would begin to carve up Africa amongst themselves as part of the so-called scramble for Africa. And you can see that depicted here in this political cartoon. At the conference, the International Congo Association would receive recognition from the participating nations. In addition, the Congress specified that it should have that the Congo Basin should have no and the International Congo Association should have no connection with Belgium or any other country beyond a personal union, but the association and the Congo Free Basin would be under the personal control of King Leopold II. Furthermore, the Congo Basin was divided between Leopold II, France, and Portugal. France would obtain 257,000 square miles, Portugal would obtain 351,000 square miles, and Leopold II would obtain the largest portion of the basin at 905,000 square miles, which you can see that carving up of the Congo here. Then, in 1885 CE, the Belgian parliament would establish the Congo Free State as a neutral independent nation with Leopold II as its king. Which now brings us to uh, our next section on the Congo Free State itself. So, with the establishment of the Congo Free State, Leopold II would quickly install trusted Belgian officials as administrators of the Congo Free State and would establish a mercenary army known as the Force Publique to police the region. The Force Publique consisted of white European mercenaries and African mercenaries of mixed African and European descent. The latter were used by Leopold II due to the belief, the very racist belief, that they were whiter and racially superior to Africans with no European descent. This would in turn exacerbate existing class and ethnic conflicts within the Congo Basin. And then, with the establishment of this new nation, the indigenous Congolese communities within the Congo Free State were forced by Leopold II to harvest ivory and rubber plants, commodities or goods valued by European empires. And then in 1887 CE, Leopold II would make Tipu Tip an Afro-Omani slave trader and an official of the East African Sultanate of Zanzibar, as well as the Sultan of the Sultanate of Areia on the eastern border of the Congo Free State. He would make this individual the governor of the Stanley Falls district, yes, named after Henry Morton Stanley, in the eastern part of the Congo Free State. Then, after John Boyd Dunlop invented inflatable rubber, bicycle tubes and the growing usage of the automobile dramatically increased the global demand for rubber, and as a result, rubber plants became the Congo Free State's primary cash crop. Then, between 1889 and 1890 CE, the Brussels Anti Slavery Conference prohibited, at least on paper, the slave trade and slavery in Africa. And Leopold II would use the conference to further his image as a humanitarian and as an excuse to begin attacking Arab slave traders in East Africa as he viewed them as economic competitors. Then in 1890 CE, British South Africa would dispatch the British colonial administrator Alfred Sharp to the Yeek Kingdom in the southeastern corner of the Congo Basin, outside of the control of Leopold II, in an attempt to obtain mineral rights from the kingdom. Merzeder, the ruler of the Yeek Kingdom, refused. Hearing of the British Empire's attempt to negotiate with the Yeek Kingdom, Leopold II would dispatch a military expedition led by white Canadian William Grant Stairs to obtain mineral rights before the British Empire could. The Stairs expedition captured and executed Merzeder and installed a puppet king of the Yeek Kingdom and made the kingdom a vassal of the Congo Free State, with this expedition happening between 1891 and 1892 CE. Now it is important to note, Leopold II initially struggled to meet the costs of running the Congo Free State. Now, but to remedy this issue, Leopold II granted concessions to private companies that allowed them to establish private domains within the Congo Free State. In return for the concessions, the companies paid an annual dividend to the Free State, and he made these concessions in 1892 CE. So, to increase rubber production and profits from the rubber trade, Leopold II would issue a decree that made all indigenous Congolese in the Congo Free State, it would make this decree would make them serfs, to increase their rubber plant quotas. This would result in large swaths of forests being destroyed to meet the quotas between 1891 and 1892 CE. Eventually, Leopold II would increasingly view Tipu Tip as an economic rival and would then use the Brussels Anti-Slavery Conference and his image as a humanitarian as an excuse to begin a war against Tipu Tip and the Sultanate of Areia. After heavy fighting, the force publique would go on to defeat Tipu Tip and would drive the Sultanate of Areia from the Congo Free State, ending what became known as the Congo Arab War in a Belgian victory, with this event happening between 1892 and 1894 CE. Then in 1894 CE, the British Empire would cede a strip of land on the eastern border of the Congo Free State, known as the Lotto Enclave, to Leopold II. However, the Lotto Enclave had been under the control of the modest state of Egypt and Sudan since 1881 CE. So, because of this, Leopold II would dispatch an expedition divided into two columns led by Francis Donis and Louis Napoleon Chaltin to take the enclave from the modest state, with this expedition leaving in December of 1896 CE. And here's a map of the modest state of Sudan and Egypt here. En route to the enclave, Donis's column would mutiny and dissolve. However, Chaltin's column would continue to the enclave, would defeat a modest army at what would become known as the Battle of Rejaf, and would drive the Mahdists from the enclave and secure the enclave for Leopold II on February 17th, 1897 CE. All right, now this brings us to the most important section of the video to go over: the atrocities in the Congo Free State. And with that, I need to give a massive trigger warning because from this point forward in the video, we are going to be discussing highly disturbing subject matter involving mutilation, sexual assault, massacres, etc. It's incredibly disturbing subject matter, but it is some subject matter that needs to be discussed. Starting with forced labor. So, the indigenous Congolese of the Congo Basin were forced to work 24 days of all day labor per month, harvesting rubber plants for Leopold II and the private companies within the Congo Free State. They worked in brutal conditions with little or no food, and many died from these harsh conditions. Edmund Picard, a Belgian senator, described the forced labor on a caravan, stating that, quote, unceasingly we meet these porters, black, miserable, with only a horrible, filthy loincloth for clothing, frizzy and bareheaded supporting the load, box, bale, ivory, tusk, barrel, most of them sickly, drooping under a burden increased by tiredness and insufficient food. A handful of rice and some sticking dried fish, a pitiful walking carotids, beasts of burden with thin monkey legs, with drawn features, eyes fixed and round from preoccupation with keeping their balance, and from the days of exhaustion. They come and go like this by the thousands, requisitioned by the state, armed with its powerful militia, handed over by chiefs whose slaves they are and who make off with their salaries, trotting with bent knees, belly forward, an arm raised to steady the load, the other leaning on a walking stick, dusty and sweaty, insects spreading across the mountains and valleys, their many files, and their task of Sisyphus dying along the road, or their journey over, heading off to die in their villages. And I'm just going to leave that there. I think that sort of speaks for itself. And that's going to be a pattern we're going to see with a lot of these sources. And here's where I got this excerpt from. And then, if any indigenous Congolese refused to work, they were severely beaten with a whip called a sjambok, or the French and Belgian term, a chicotte. Stanislas Lafranc, a Belgian prosecutor in the Congo Free State, describes the use of the chicotte or the sjambok And in one instance, he states that he heard the screams of children and found, quote, some 30 urchins, of whom several were 7 or 8 years old, lined up and waiting their turn, watching, terrified, their companions being flogged. Most of the urchins in a paroxysm of grief, kicked so frightfully that the soldiers ordered to hold them down by the hands and feet had to lift them off the ground. 25 times the whip lashed down on each of the children. Later, Lefranc describes how, quote, the station chief selects the victims, trembling, haggard. They lie face down on the ground. Two of their companions, sometimes four, seize them by the feet and hands and remove their cotton drawers. Each time that the torturer lifts the chicotte, a reddish stripe appears on the skin of the pitiful victim, who, however firmly held, gasps in frightful contortions. At the first blows, the unhappy victims let out horrible cries, which soon become faint groans. In a refinement of evil, some officers, and I've witnessed this, demanded that when the sufferer gets up panting, he must graciously give the military salute. And here's the source that I got this excerpt from. And here is a picture of a shakot or a sjambok whip, and a picture of an individual being subjected to a whipping with a shakot or sjambok whip. And then there was hostage taking, where the force publique would often use the taking of hostages, including women, children, and elders, as a tool to force village chiefs to send workers to harvest rubber. George Bracus, a force public officer, describes this practice, saying that, quote, the women taken during the last raid at Ingwetra are causing me no end of trouble. All the soldiers want one. The sentries who are supposed to watch them unchain the prettiest ones and rape them. The act of taking hostages is even described in a semi-official administrative instruction book. This book states that in, quote, Africa, taking prisoners is an easy thing to do. For if the natives hide, they will not go far from their village, and must come to look for food in the gardens with surround it. In watching these carefully, you will be certain of capturing people after a brief delay. When you feel you have enough captives, you should choose among them an old person, preferably an old woman. Make her a present and send her to the chief to begin negotiations. The chief, wanting to see his people set free, will usually decide to send representatives. And here's the source that I got this excerpt from. And then even with this, if any chief would fall behind on his village's rubber plant quota, he would be captured and sent to prison, which you can see here. And also, they would oftentimes be lies would be made up about them, such as they were cannibals who were captured in the act of eating flesh, when in reality they were sent to prison because they couldn't fill the rubber quota, or for some other reason that we'll get into in a minute. Then there was the act of taking severed hands as proof and currency, where the force publique would routinely sever the hands of laborers who refused to work as proof of a successful or as proof as a successful raid on a village. William Shepard, a white American missionary, describes the aftermath of the destruction of a village at the hands of African warriors allied with the Congo Free State. He specifically describes how the chief, quote, conducted us to a framework of stick, under which was a burning slow fire, and there were the right hands. I counted them, 81 in all. Shepard further describes how the chief explained that, quote, see, here is our evidence. I always have to cut off the right hand of those we kill in order to show the state how many we have killed. Another account by an African man named Swambe describes the actions of Belgian official Leon Fieves, stating that, quote, all blacks saw this man as the devil of the equator. From all the bodies killed in the field, you had to cut off the hands. He wanted to see the number of hands cut off by each soldier, who had to bring them in baskets. A village which refused to provide rubber would be completely swept clean. As a young man, I saw Fieves's soldier Malili, then guarding the village of Boyeka, take a net, put 10 arrested natives in it, attach big stones to the net, and make it tumble into the river. Rubber causes these torments. That's why we no longer want to hear its name spoken. Soldiers made young men kill or rape their own mothers and sisters. And here's the source that I got this these excerpts from. And here's a picture of victims of this practice of taking severed hands as proof or and currency. And here's one here as well. And here is one of an individual looking at the severed hands of family members that were taken as part of this practice. And then there was also, much like in the United States, um, there was the forced assimilation of indigenous Congolese children, very similar to the forced assimilation of Native American children in the United States, where Congolese children were forcibly removed from their families and taken to child colonies where they were taught how to work on plantations or work as soldiers. At least 50% of the children taken would die of disease or from exhaustion as a result of repeated forced marches. One Belgian account describes this practice, stating that, quote, Monsieur Deveau furnished us with 5 prisoners tied by the neck to dig up clay for brick making, as well as 25 laborers from Mbimbo for gathering wood. A Catholic priest reported this to his superior in 1899. Since the last convoy of children from Buta, 25 others have arrived. From time to time, we have baptized some of the littler ones in case of danger of their dying. On July 1st, we celebrated the National Day of Etat Independant du Congo. At 8 o'clock, with all our children and a flag in front, we were at the bottom of the stairway carved out of the cliff to welcome Commandant Deveau and his soldiers, returning to the mission. The children marched in front, the soldiers following during Mass. At the moment of elevation of the host, uh, present arms was sounded by bugles. And here is the source that I got these quotes from. And here are pictures of some of these child colonies that existed both in the Congo Free State and the subsequent Belgian Congo, which we'll talk about in little later in the video. And here's another picture of that as well. And then there was also starvation, famine, and exposure, where the force publique would often burn entire villages, resulting in the deaths of many indigenous Congolese and many fleeing to the forest where they would die of starvation and exposure to the elements. One white British explorer in the Congo Free State would describe these events, stating that, quote, the Belgians have crossed the frontier, descended into the valley, shot down large numbers of natives, British subjects driven off by the young women and cattle, and actually tied up and burned the old woman. I do not make these statements without having gone into the matter. Each village has been burnt to the ground, and as I fled from the country, I saw skeletons everywhere, in such postures. What tales of horror they told. Thus, a tract of country about 3,000 square miles in extent has been depopulated and devastated. This was the Congo Free State. When Mboya, the Belega, told me similar tales, here I was repeatedly given accounts that tallied in all essentials. And further north, the Wakoba made the same piteous complaints, and I saw myself that a country well populated and responsive to just treatment in the guard's time is now practically a howling wilderness. And then one indigenous Congolese refugee describes these events. Oh, well, for one thing, here is the source that I got this excerpt from. But then one indigenous Congolese refugee describes these events, stating that we were always in the forest to find the rubber vines. To go without food, our women had to give up cultivating the fields and gardens. Then we starved. When we failed, our rubber was short, the soldiers came out to our towns and killed us. Many were shot. Some had their ears cut off. Others were tied up with ropes around their necks and taken away. And here is the source here. that I got the quote from. Furthermore, agricultural fields were left untended due to the Congo Free State and many companies, such as the Anglo-Belgian Indian Rubber Company, forcing so many indigenous Congolese to harvest rubber. As a result, crops would decline and lead to a period of immense famine memorialized by indigenous Congolese as Lonkali, or the time of famine. And again, this happened in 1900 CE. And of course, as often is it happens with European colonization, a large number of individuals died as a result of disease. With diseases introduced to the Congo Basin by Europeans, such as smallpox and the sleeping sickness, resulting in the deaths of millions of indigenous Congolese. Now, it's important to note the sleeping sickness was indigenous to other parts of Africa, but it was either very rare or non-existent in the Congo Basin and was introduced in the Congo Basin by European colonists. So that is important to note there. Now, that being said, none of this means that necessarily the indigenous Congolese peoples of the Congo Basin let Leopold II do this unopposed. In fact, there was a great deal of African resistance against Leopold II. For example, the powerful Kuba Kingdom in the northern Congo Basin repeatedly refused to allow Belgian envoys to even enter the kingdom. In addition, the kingdom was isolated enough to not be affected by raids conducted by the Force Publique, Portuguese slave raiders, and Arab slave raiders between the 1880s and 1900 CE. However, despite its resistance, the Kuba kingdom would eventually fall when the Force Publique reached the Kuba capital and looted it in 1900 CE. Then there was the Chokwe kingdom and the Chokwe people who were able to repulse the Force Publique in the Congo Free State for 20 years. And Leopold II and the Congo Free State were only able to fully subjugate the Chokwe people after suffering heavy casualties between 1885 and 1905 CE. Uh, on top of this, many indigenous Congolese chiefs would rebel against the Congo Free State in response to the harsh treatment that they faced, with several of these rebellions happening in the 1890s CE. For example, white Swedish missionary Carl Theodor Anderson describes one instance of rebellion by a local chief named Nzonsu, who went on to attack and destroy a Congo Free State porter station and killed the Belgian official Eugene Rommel, who was in charge of said station. Anderson states that, quote, if our friends of the mission are worried for our safety, here is a result of letters and newspaper reports about the unrest in these parts. I wish to reassure them. The leader of the rebels, Chief Nzonsu of Kasi, has let us know he does not wish to harm any one of us, as we have always shown that we are friends of the black people, and anyone who knows of the conditions cannot feel surprised. Another white Swedish missionary further describes Nzonsu's rebellion, saying that, quote, a man sows what he reaps. In reality, the state is the true source of these uprisings. It is strange that people who claim to be civilized think they can treat their fellow man, in, even though he is of a different color, any which way. Without a doubt, one of the most disreputable of the officials is the late Mr. Rommel. One should not speak ill of the dead, but I must simply mention some smaller matter to prove that the unrest has been justified. He imprisoned women when the people refused to transport supplies and to sell him goods below market prices. He was not ashamed to come by our stations and abduct our schoolgirls and treat them in despicable ways. One Sunday morning, Brother Anderson and I went to a neighboring village and helped release three poor women whom his soldiers had imprisoned because one of them had asked for the return of a stone jug which had been taken from her. But what happens to all of the women who are taken prisoner? Some are set free when their husbands have done all they can to regain the one who is dearest to them. Others are forced to work in the fields and also work as prostitutes. Our most respected men here have told us with tears in their eyes and much vexation in their hearts that they had recently seen a group of 700 women chained together and transported to the coast on steamboats. And they said, whether they cut off our heads or that of a chicken, it is all the same to them. So, can anyone feel truly surprised that the discontent has finally come to the surface? Nsansu, the leader of the uprising, and Rommel's assassin, only wanted to become the Engelbrecht of the Congo and the Gustav Vasa of his people. His followers are as little to him as Swedes were to those leaders in those times, to their leaders in those times. And here are the sources that I got those quotations from. And then between 1895 and 1899 CE, angered by harsh treatment at the hands of Belgian commander Batelatella or Telatella soldiers, they're called that alternately. Um, in a force publique garrison, would rebel and kill the base commander and initiate a guerrilla war against the Congo Free State, with it taking the Congo Free State 4 years to put down what would become known as the Lüleborg Mutiny of 1895 CE. With this, of course, lasting between 1895 and 1899 CE. And as you can see here, it actually, from this map, it actually took up a good chunk of the Congo Free State. And then in 1900, uh, another rebellion would happen at the hands of Telatella soldiers in the Force Publique, specifically in the Force Publique garrisoned at Fort Boma, where they would rebel against the Congo Free State, seize control of the fort, and threatened the city of Boma. The rebels were repeatedly defeated, but they were able to keep fighting for several years. With the official end date of the rebellion being 1901 CE, but records show that fighting actually continued sporadically into 1908 CE. All right, now this brings us to our next section: international criticism of Leopold II and the Congo Free State. So, international criticism of the Congo Free State really began with the arrival of George Washington Williams, an African American journalist, writer, and historian, uh, to the Congo Free State, where he traveled to the Congo Free State and witnessed the atrocities committed against the indigenous Congolese in 1890 CE. Appalled by these atrocities, Williams would write a public open letter to Leopold II, bringing these atrocities to the attention of the United States and Europe, with him writing this letter on July 18th, 1890 CE. Now, I do want to say that this is a rather large letter, so I'm not going to read all of it, but I will read several excerpts from said letter. With the first expert reading, and I quote, Fifth, your Majesty's government is excessively cruel to its prisoners, condemning them for the slightest offences to the chain gang, the likes of which cannot be seen in any other government in the civilized or uncivilized world. Often these ox chains eat into the necks of the prisoners and produce sores about which the flies circle, aggravating the running wound. So the prisoner is constantly worried. These poor creatures are frequently beaten with a dried piece of hippopotamus skin called a shakot, and usually the blood flows at every stroke when laid on. But the cruelties visited upon soldiers and workmen are not to be compared with the sufferings of the poor natives, who upon the slightest pretext are thrust into the wretched prisons here in the upper river. I cannot deal with the dimensions of these prisoners in this letter, but will do so in my report to my government. Excerpt 2 reads, Women are imported into your Majesty's government for immoral purposes. They are introduced by two methods. Black men are dispatched to the Portuguese coast, where they engage these women as mistresses of white men who pay the procurer a monthly sum. The other method is by capturing native women and condemning them to 7 years' servitude for some imaginary crime against the state, with which the villages of these women are charged. The state then hires these women out to the highest bidder, the officers having the first choice and then the men. Whenever children are born of such relations, the state maintains that the woman being its property, the child belongs to it also. Not long ago, a Belgian trader had a child by a slave woman of the state, and he tried to secure possession of it that he might educate it. But the chief of the station where he resided refused to be moved by his entreaties. At length he appealed to the governor general, and he gave the woman, and thus the trader obtained the child also. This was, however, an unusual case of generosity and clemency. There is only one post that I know of where there is not to be found children of the civil and military officers of your Majesty's government abandoned to degradation. The white men bring their own flesh and blood under the lash of the most cruel master, the state of the Congo. Excerpt 3, and the final excerpt I will read, reads, and I quote, Your Majesty's government has been and is now guilty of waging unjust and cruel wars against the natives, with the hope of securing slaves and women to minister to the behest of the officers of your government. In such slave hunting, raids on one village uh, is armed by the state against the other. The force thus secured is incorporated with regular troops. I have no adequate terms with which to depict your majesty the brutal acts of your soldiers upon such raids as these. The soldiers who open the combat are usually the bloodthirsty, cannibalistic Bangalas, who give no quarter to the aged grandmother or nursing child at the breast of its mother. There are instances in which they have brought the heads of their victims to their white officers on the expeditionary steamers and afterwards eaten the bodies of the slain children. In one war, two Belgian army officers saw from the deck of their steamer a native in a canoe some distance away. He was not a combatant and was ignorant of the conflict in progress upon the shore, some distance away. The officers made a wager of £5 that they could hit the native with their rifles. 3 shots were fired, and the native fell dead, pierced through the heart, and the trade canoe was transformed into a funeral barge and floated silently down river. And here's the source that I got these excerpts from. And Williams would continue to speak publicly about what he witnessed for about a year. However, despite his attempts, and he would do this despite attempts by Leopold II to discredit him. However, Williams would die from tuberculosis and pleurisy while in Blackpool, England, on August 2nd, 1891 CE. Then, in 1899 CE, Joseph Conrad, a white writer of Polish and British descent who had spent 12 years in the Congo Free State and had witnessed the atrocities inflicted upon the indigenous Congolese, would go on to write the book known as Heart of Darkness, which was a critique of the Congo Free State and European colonization of Africa as a whole. And he would do this in 1899 CE. Now, that being said, it's important to note that this book was still, even for the, while it was a while it was a critique of colonialism, it's still filled with heavy colonial views, and heavily racist views. So it is a critique of colonialism, but it's also a heavily flawed critique as well. And then between 1900 and 1913 CE, E.D. Morel, a white British journalist, would pick up the campaign against Leopold II that was started by George Washington Williams. Morel would write many articles criticizing the Congo Free State and would publish accounts of the state atrocities against the indigenous Congolese. However, Morel was not an anti colonial writer. Instead, he advocated for a more benevolent colonial power to take over the Congo Basin, such as the British Empire, um, which was his sort of ideal colonial power as well. Now, we're not going to read any excerpts from his writings because we've already done that. One of the sources I read in the atrocities section actually came from E.D. Morel, which you can see here. And then, as a result of Morel's journalism. This would lead to an increase in public outcry over the Congo Free State, and in response, the British Parliament would dispatch Roger Casement to investigate the Congo Free State. While there, he witnessed the atrocities against the indigenous Congolese and would publish a detailed report of his findings known as the Casement Report. And he would publish this in 1904 CE. Uh, During this time, Casement would befriend Morel or Morel and would convince him to create the Congo Reform Association in order to campaign for the Congo Basin to be taken from Leopold II. Members of the association included Booker T. Washington, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Mark Twain, and Bertrand Russell. With this association being created in 1904 CE. The Congo Reform Association would lead a massive propaganda campaign against Leopold II, and Leopold II, unsurprisingly, would attempt to discredit the accounts published by the association, but gradually lost the propaganda war, which lasted between 1904 and 1908 CE. And you can see examples of this in this political cartoon depicting Leopold II and his rubber monopoly as a like snake or serpent coiling around and strangling the Congo, and various books written by members of the association, such as Mark Twain. Eventually, on November 15th, 1908 CE, the Belgian Parliament would seize the Congo Free State from Leopold II and would establish the Belgian Congo. And Leopold II would die from an embolism on December 17th, 1909 CE. And then eventually, it's important to note the Congo Reform Association did not end until Morel deemed sufficient changes had been made in the Belgian Congo, with these changes being viewed to have been made finally, air quotes, in 1913 CE. Now, of course, this is not true, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Actually, right now, to be fair. This leads us to our next section, the Belgian Congo. So, despite the Congo Reform Association's wishes, the Belgian government and the Belgian Congo would continue to use many of the policies of Leopold II. For example, the Force Publique would remain the primary police force within the Congo Basin, and the ethnic and class divisions encouraged by Leopold II were also encouraged by the Belgian government. Indigenous Congolese would continue to be forced to do hard labor. Initially, they would continue to harvest rubber. However, the mining of rare earth minerals eventually became more valuable to the Belgian government than rubber. Uh, Indigenous Congolese children continued to be forcibly assimilated. And the Belgian Congo would actually continue to expand, as seen after World War I, when the Belgian government would seize the German colonies of Burundi and Rwanda and incorporate them into the Belgian Congo. The same policies used against the indigenous Congolese were also used against the indigenous Tutsi and Hutus of Burundi and Rwanda. With this annexation of Rwanda and Burundi happening on June 17th, 1916 CE. And then between 1939 and 1945 CE, the while the Belgian Congo continued to be under the control of Belgium, despite the nation of Belgium itself being captured by the Nazis, the government fled and was still under control of its colonies. And during this period of time, the forced mining of rare earth minerals in the Belgian Congo would become integral to the Allied war effort in World War II, especially the mining of uranium for nuclear bombs. Then, between 1960 and 1961, the Belgian government would grant the Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda their independence. So as you can see in that based on that section, while the Congo Free State was taken from Leopold II and given to the Belgian government, basically nothing changed for the indigenous Congolese. all of the policies remained in place, um, and they had little to no change in quality of life. It was essentially just a change in management, nothing else. Which now brings us to our last section, the aftermath of the Congo Free State and the Belgian Congo. So, for one thing, estimates by historians and anthropologists put the death toll of indigenous Congolese under the reign of Leopold II and the Congo Free State to be between 1 million and 10 million people. Now, it's important to note this varies wildly. Some historians and anthropologists put it on the higher end, towards 10 million. I've even seen some estimates to maybe as high as 13 million, while others put it as low as 1 million people. It's arguably probably somewhere in the middle, but this is the estimate that historians and anthropologists give. Then one aftermath important aftermath of the Congo Free State is that Leopold II continues to be viewed as a humanitarian by many Belgians and members of the Belgian government to this day. Now, of course, not all of them, but he's still viewed as a humanitarian nonetheless. In fact, the atrocities of Leopold II and the Congo Free State are often overlooked in the wake of World War II and the Holocaust. Um, in fact, many people don't even know what the who Leopold II was or what the Congo Free State was, um, outside of the broader academic circles. However, it is important to note that scholarship on Leopold II and the Congo Free State have increased greatly between the 1970s CE and the present day, with this video being a prime example of that. Then, after gaining independence from Belgium on June 24th, 1960 CE, Patrice Lumumba would be elected as president of the new Democratic Republic of Congo. However, despite its independence, foreign powers would continue to exploit the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the case of the United States, it viewed Lumumba and his left leaning Pan African political views as a threat to the power of the United States and its allies, including Belgium. In response to Lumumba's views, the United States Central Intelligence Agency, or more commonly known as the CIA, would help Mobutu Sese Seko see it would help him seize the Congolese presidency in a military coup d'état, and Lumumba would later be assassinated. Now, while it is unknown if they had any direct involvement, the CIA has since confirmed in declassified documents that they were in communication with Lumumba's assassin and were at least complicit in his assassination, meaning they were in communication with him, knew who he was, knew what he was planning, and at the very least did absolutely nothing to stop it, if not actually helped him or put him up to doing it. After this coup d'etat and the assassination of Lumumba, Mobutu Sese Seko would enact a brutal, decades-long dictatorship, with the effects of the dictatorship's policies affecting the Democratic Republic of Congo to this day. With this happening from between 1961 CE and the present. And of course, all of this was not completely the fault of the United States, of course. A lot of the blame does indeed lie on Mobutu, who was a horrible tyrant and despot, but he wouldn't have gained power if not for the help of the United States. Or I can't say that completely. He would have had a much harder time at the very least gaining power without the help of the United States. And then in addition to all of this, despite gaining independence, ethnic and class tensions imposed on the indigenous groups of the Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda by Leopold II and the Belgian government would lead to the outbreak of multiple genocides and ethnic conflicts, such as the Tutsis genocide of the Hutus in Burundi from April to August 1972 CE, and the more famous Hutu genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda from April to the July of 1994 CE. And then one of the most important points to bring up is that despite its independence, the Democratic Republic of Congo, um, and the Republic of Congo, its neighbor, continue to be exploited by foreign companies for its rare earth minerals to this day, with foreign companies exploiting the Congo, including companies from the United States, such as Tesla, wanting the rare earth minerals for their electric cars, and the Chinese CMOC Group Limited. And then, similar to the mineral mining, another very important point to bring up about how colonialism still affects Africa to this day, including the Congo, is that the act of cutting off limbs as punishment that was popularized by Leopold II and other European colonial rulers is still heavily used by dictators throughout Africa into the modern day, which you can see in these pictures here. And with that, I bring this video to an end. I wish I could end it on a happier note, but unfortunately, these are the facts. So mm, with that in mind, I hope everyone learned a lot from this video. Uh, and I hope you learned, if you didn't already know about the Leopold II and the atrocities of the Congo Free State, as well as the Belgian Congo. I hope you either learned more about it if you already knew about it, but if you didn't, I hope you learned a lot about it and you take what you learned about it from this video and educate other people on the subject, and also ideally work to improve the lives of people in Africa and undo the brutal long-lasting effects of European colonialism in the region. Uh, if it, and with that, this ends the video. If you would like to see me cover any of the video subjects I discuss in this video in greater detail in later videos, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.